And I really want to start by saying, thank you to my peers who are up here before me. Such great content yesterday and today. You guys have set a bar that's really high. Hi, good morning. I'm Niraj Dangoria. I've met most of you, I think. I'm the Associate Dean for Facilities Planning and Management at the Stanford University School of Medicine. I've been there about 11 years. I thought I was going to be there 3, but 11 years later, I'm still there. And the School of Medicine is a really interesting place. We have about 2,400 faculty, about 900 of them are professoriate. The other 1,500 or so are what we call clinician educators, which means they practice medicine and they teach. We have about 3 million square feet of space. We are, just the School of Medicine is a $1.4 billion annual enterprise. So we're a big operation, and we do about 600 million plus of research every year. And I oversee real estate space planning is one group. Projects and construction management is another group. I oversee facilities operations, safety and emergency management, and business sort of operations, which includes energy and sustainability and retail operations and everything else that has a physical context on campus. So not unlike what my colleague at at Harvard spoke about in terms of the overall portfolio. Prior to coming to Stanford, I started my career at UMass Amherst, actually making blueprints in the back room. I'm certain the blueprint machine doesn't exist anymore, but that's how I got into this business. And from UMass Amherst, I was then at University of Cincinnati, where I got to transition this campus, and then moved to converting an Army base to a college campus at Cal State University, Monterey Bay, before coming to Stanford about 11 years ago. So that's sort of a little bit of my background, but today we're going to talk about workplace. So workplace just by itself is nothing, right? It's just a thing. It's just a word. But when you put 2 really critical ingredients into it, the people and place, and bring them together, which is why we call it the Nexus, it becomes something a lot more meaningful. What is interesting is that each of these 2 pieces, the people side and the place side, have their own sort of set of influencers. And without these influencers, they wouldn't mean much. And so on the people side, you have the actual job that you do. You have the colleagues you work with and you are social with. You have then transportation issues and quality of life issues, which includes cost of housing. And let's face it, everything that happens in our lives really influences our job, right? You guys agree? On the place side is the actual place where you work, whether it's an office or a cube or what have you. It's the organization that you represent and the ethos of the organization and everything that goes with it. Parking. Anybody here from a campus where parking is not an issue? Right. Parking is a really important part of the place. And then technology. And that continues to evolve at an amazingly rapid pace. So when any one of these influencers sort of go out of sync, the equilibrium gets disturbed quite a bit. And that does have an impact on your workplace. So where we are today, there's lots of things that are going sort of up and down. But I just want to show you one example where the equilibrium is really upset. Any of you want to come work at Stanford and want to live in Palo Alto, this is what you get for where to live and how to live. And this is not an exaggeration. And you may think this is funny, you may think this is awful and this is terrible, but you know what? This is our reality. And that's what we are living with. But we'll talk about that in a moment. Let's talk a little bit about the places where we work right now. If you're fortunate enough to work in a historic building, which is gorgeous and beautiful, like some of the buildings we saw at Georgia Tech, you have a nice office in a fabulous building. But if, like many of us, you happen to work in a building that was built in the 70s or 80s, chances are your offices look like this. Can anybody relate to this? A couple of hands. Now, if you are fortunate enough to work in a building that was built in the 90s or maybe a little bit later, your offices look like this. The cubes have gotten a little smaller, maybe not blue, but can anybody relate to this? A few more hands. Now, if you're really in a swanky building and you've been there, and it's a brand new building, which means it was built 10 years ago, right? In higher ed, 10 years is brand new. Your offices might look like that, right? I would submit to you that most of us can find ourselves somewhere in this mix. Fair enough? So when a couple of years ago, I started hearing this phrase, ABW, it was like, what in the heck is that? Activity-based workplace. Have you guys heard about activity-based workplace? Anybody? Somebody? Somebody. Yeah, I see a few heads nodding. So activity-based workplace is this big sort of buzzword in the Silicon Valley where I live. And so I said, wait, this doesn't make any sense. And, activity-based workplace, yeah, I get it. And my mind flashed back to, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. Many of you probably still remember the telex and the telex operator who sat in the workplace and pulled wires and stuck wires back and forth, right? You remember that? So I said, what's new about this? This is not anything new. And actually, the activity-based workplace goes even back. The picture on your bottom right, it says computing division, computing section, and is a pre-World War II picture. So, what's so new about this? The more I thought about this, I said, wait, this concept goes back even farther to biblical times, right? So it's like, what the heck is this all about? I did some more research and found out that it's not actually activity-based workplace, but it's activity-based working. And there's a difference. And activity-based working was something that was developed by this Dutch consultant and author who basically said, and his premise was that the more conscious people are of what they're doing, they choose where to do it and get better results. So Google was one of the first companies that really glammed onto this. And they said, this is fantastic. And so Google is right next to us, and so their offices are all about activity-based working. And so we went and checked out a few Google offices. And I kid you not, these are their offices. Can you imagine any of your faculty working in a little tuk-tuk from Bangkok? Or a taxi from Stuttgart? Hard to imagine that our esteemed faculty would take to this sort of working environment. It's great for the 20-something millennials, but for faculty, I don't know that it really applies. So I did a little bit more research and found out this whole notion about workplace is actually something that people talk about and write about a lot. And there's this guy, Dan Schwabel, from Forbes, who actually spends a lot of time thinking about this. And every year, he puts out the top trends for workplace in the United States. These are his trends for 2018, and if you research Dan Schwabel, you will see all his sort of lists from the past years. As far as I know, he's been doing it at least from 2012 onwards, or maybe even a little bit before. I think there's a lot of things that we can find in common over here, but I'm not sure that all of these apply to higher education. So what we believe are the sort of issues that really are impacting higher education are these. How wonderful, I left my notes back at my table. That's great. The impact of artificial intelligence, and I'll say with this, is the impact of IoT. I'll give you a small example, and it's less about artificial intelligence, but it's more about where we are going to go. So in my business operations side, I have a number of people. I have a few accountants who get invoices from all our vendors, and we have many because we outsource many of our services. So every month we'd get a paper invoice by mail that would then probably be scanned by somebody else, and there were like 6, 7 different touch points where everybody sort of touched that invoice. About 6 months ago, 8 months ago, our lead accountant said, this is crazy. And so now we have a system where we have a box folder online, and all our vendors submit their invoices to the box folder, and they are processed very quickly. Of course, being higher ed, we had to measure it. More importantly, we are a lean campus. We are implementing lean. And so we measured what that meant. And just that simple notion of the vendors uploading their invoices to a box has saved us a 0.25 FTE. And I can tell you that it's not going to be long before the invoices are processed automatically and only the anomalies are kicked out for hand review by an accountant, right? This is going to have an impact on our business. This is when artificial intelligence really starts coming into play. What is the impact of that? I think the impact of that is many lower level jobs that are very process-oriented are going to go away. Where we had 3 accountants, maybe we'll need 2 or 1.5. But what is going to replace it is the ability to work together to create a greater intelligence and a greater impact on the work that you are doing. So it is coming. It's there in bits and pieces in many places. You know, another example, and I know a lot of you do this, part of our lean effort was to say, we need to reduce our time for our quick response work orders, which sometimes stood open for days and weeks. We gave everybody iPads, and we forced them to carry them with them all the time. And what we found, that they could close the work request the work order as soon as the work was done, and what was taking days and weeks sometimes, now, just by virtue of just finishing what they had started and recording it, we were down to, we had a 70–80% reduction in the time of our quick response work orders. So intelligence in our work is coming. Artificial intelligence, which will make it even better, is coming faster than we think. And when combined with IoT, the Internet of Things, one of my friends who's in the tech industry said, the IoT issue has had the biggest hype cycle of any technology in the history of Silicon Valley, and that is because the promise hasn't yet been delivered. There's a lot of IoT out there, the chairs with sensors that give you occupancy data and things like that, which is producing globs of data. We just aren't quite prepared to deal with the data. So when we know how to deal with the data, it's going to get better. The second thing is higher education as an attractive employer. Is the current model of higher education a sustainable venture? I know there is a lot of data out there. There's an economist from Ohio State who said 500 private colleges are going to close in the next decade. On the flip side, the University of California this year had the highest number of student applications. I know that because my daughter was one of those 223,000 students who applied to the UC system. And the system is bursting at its capacities. So I don't know how much it is about mass change. I think the lower end of the spectrum definitely will change. But those who survive are going to have to do this better than they have in the past, and we have to get creative about the use of our resources. Greater mobility, there's no doubt that we are working everywhere all the time, right? You're going to be at an airport shortly, you have an hour before your flight, you're going to be working. But technology hasn't quite, I don't believe, lived up to this big promise. And I'll give you an example, right? The telephone. It's a funny story. I took my daughters to India about 6 years ago, and my younger daughter saw a rotary phone for the first time, and she said, "What's that?" But when you think of the user interface of the telephone, how we interact with the telephone, everything has changed about it except the fact that we punch in the numbers and we get to talk to somebody at the other end, right? Our interface hasn't changed that much. When you think of our office technologies, we don't have that same degree of sophistication or simplicity in the whole user interface. I think when that happens, and I think it is happening, where your laptop becomes sort of your single source of communication, but when it becomes really easy, it'll sort of really make us very mobile, and then again, you sort of question, what are you going to go to the office for? And I think those days are coming. And then, local and regional influences play a great big deal in everything that we do. So with all of that said, what are the things that are influencing Stanford? Geopolitical issues is number one for us. Stanford has 8,800 acres. We have 24,000 students, but we have no land, practically no land left to build because of a wonderful NIMBYism. You all know what NIMBY stands for, not in my backyard. So between that and traffic and some other sort of environmental issues like air quality, things like that, mostly we are not allowed to burn wood anymore because of air quality issues. There are lots of geopolitical issues that limit our growth. Why do higher education institutions grow? University of Central Florida is a great example. They've had students coming by the droves, so that is what has influenced growth. But for a research-intensive institution like Stanford and for many others that you are here, why do we grow? We grow not because that's what we want to do, but fundamentally we grow because as the universe of knowledge is expanding, you have to have greater depth in transmitting that knowledge as education to the next generation. That's why we grow. So growth is inevitable. If you're not growing, you're falling behind. And so, we have to find ways of growing. Cost of living is a huge issue for us. You saw the earlier slide. Within a 30-mile radius of Stanford, you cannot buy a house for less than $1 million. The heat map on the right shows you how real estate pricing has jumped up in the last 5-6 years, and most of it is centered around all the big technology companies. And we can't compete with them. Finding and retaining employees is a very big deal for us. Google, Apple, Twitter, you name it, Facebook. It's great to be a part of the whole technology evolution, but you know what? We need people to come clean our buildings, serve our food, do things like that. The minimum wage in California has gotten to be $15 now. Apple and Google and Facebook pay their janitors $20 an hour. They give them free food and a lot of other sort of things like that, which is very meaningful to those people at the lower end of the spectrum. But those companies are just the tip of the sort of iceberg. There's a lot of employers beneath them who are really struggling. We've had a restaurant chain close in the Bay Area, and they've taken all their retail outlets and they're gone simply because they cannot find people to work in those restaurants. So this is happening, and this is going to happen in more and more urban areas. Commute and transportation is a big thing for us. So Stanford, as one of its benefits, gives you the ability to take public transit for free. Whether it's the train, the bus, what have you, you get to take it for free. It's a benefit that we tell our employees we are giving you, but really it's not a benefit. It's a traffic mitigation requirement because of environmental issues. But even with that, people are commuting 2 hours, 3 hours a day. And when you think about this, this is not sustainable. Because who comes to work at Stanford? Not the 20-something who sort of really wants to make their mark. They go to work for the Apples, the Googles, and things like that. And somewhere along the way, they maybe acquire a spouse, they get a couple of children, and all of a sudden, quality of life becomes important. And so what they want then is a sustainable future, a secure job. That's when they come to Stanford. And if they're spending 2 hours driving up and down rather than spending some time at their kid's soccer game, that doesn't do us any good. That doesn't do the employee any good. It once again disturbs the sort of whole workplace environment. So these are all factors that we have not, as facilities professionals, as planners, designers, operators. This is not stuff that we've had to deal with before, but we are having to deal with now. So what is Stanford doing about this? I just want to very briefly highlight 2 projects. The first is the Center for Academic Medicine, which is all about our clinical faculty who live 2 lives. They have a life that they spend in the clinic, in the hospitals, and then a life that they spend in their offices, pursuing their intellectual sort of and academic work. The second project is called Stanford Redwood City, where for the first time, the university is going to move 2,400 people away from the main campus to Redwood City, which is like 7 miles away, with the goal that this move will create capacity on campus for growth that I talked about. 800 of those 2,400 people are from the School of Medicine. Knowing how much time our people are spending in our buildings and on work, we said we have to bring life to them. So amenities becomes really big. Flexibility of spaces, greater ergonomics. One thing we have committed to every single person, doesn't matter whether they are the president of the university, the dean of the School of Medicine, or the lowest employee, gets a sit-stand desk. That's a standard, which is quite an investment. And then finally, we have gone to open workstations for staff, offices only for faculty. We had another med school campus that said no, they were going to put faculty in open desks, 4-feet desks, and that didn't go down very well, and there were great repercussions. And so we spent a lot of time programming this building. Just a couple of slides on what these buildings might look like. Lots of amenities, starting with parking under the building, a gym with showers and everything right there, a great cafeteria, but other things like having a concierge service in the building so that they don't have to go anywhere to get their work done. You want laundry picked up, you have Amazon delivered there. There's a concierge desk that will sort of support their needs, but also a version of the Apple Genius Bar where you can go and there's IT help available from 6 a.m. in the morning to 7 a.m. Cafe where there's all kinds of different food and open much longer hours than is traditional. A lot of spaces for peer-to-peer interaction. The sort of middle picture on the top row is the lounge, which is modeled after your airline lounge where you can go, you can meet, you can sort of get a cup of coffee, a snack, it's all available. Because these guys are so busy from early morning to late evening that whatever we can do to make their lives better is good. And then, private offices, our private offices, single occupancy offices are 80 square feet each. For clinical faculty, we have shared offices that are 120 square feet each. The image on the upper right shows you their ability to take a nap if they want to. We have a little couch in their office. So, and then open workstations for staff. This Redwood City campus is huge. It's a huge investment. 1.5 million square feet. Buildings are really expensive, limestone clad. It's 7 miles away, but it adds 40 minutes to the commute of most people who will be working there, which is huge given the already challenging situation. But that's not what's important. What's important is the concept that these people are going to be remote and will permanently work remotely. Yes, there will be some minimal back and forth by senior level staff, but for the most part, these people are here. And I can almost put money on this, that in 5 years, it will not be Redwood City, but it could be Reno or Portland or Austin, places where we can actually have people live for the salary we pay them, and there is enough biotech or medicine around where we will find people. And so that's our next step in workplace evolution is not have multiple campuses like many institutions do, but actually have work sites in other places where people can afford to live. So, this is sort of where we are headed. This is what the building looks like, a lot more we workspace rather than I individual workspaces, huddle rooms and things like that because we are big into lean. So I looked at some of the new office spaces that have been built in Silicon Valley. I was happy to see books in at least one of them. But really, as you see, this is all about community spaces. It's not really about how we work. Now, can higher education really get there? I don't think so, but we will at least make some progress towards it. So ask yourself these questions. That do you think about this nexus, which I think is critical, and if we are fundamentally moving to to a new sort of paradigm. And then how do faculty and staff interact? On our campus, I deal with 1,000 faculty and almost 8,000 staff. I have a much greater degree of impact on the 8,000 staff, so maybe that's where I should focus on and not fight the faculty battles and die on the hill. And so sort of the last thing is understand and accept your challenges. Furniture is a big part of what we do. Furniture vendors design for the masses. Be true about what you need and work with them. Don't just accept the furniture design du jour. And think about what you're going to be thinking of 5 years from now and project 10 years out. And lastly, please let me know if you have any extra space. We really need it. We've been perpetually short of space. And then, change is coming, but how will you know change has actually arrived? The day our help desk becomes this, we will know things have changed. Thank you very much for being here and being a wonderful audience.